Hello church, my name is Noel and I'm one of the postgrads here in St. Aldates. The thought for today is based on Luke chapter 24 verse 49, where Jesus tells the disciples, "I'm going to send you what my Father has promised, but stay in the city until you have been clothed with power from on high." These are the very last words from Jesus in Luke's Gospel, and as I reflect on this passage, the phrase which really catches my attention is, "Stay in the city." The disciples had originally come to Jerusalem from Galilee to celebrate the Passover with their teacher. We don't quite know the order of events between Jesus' resurrection and his ascension, but at some point the disciples had gone back to Galilee, as John and as Matthew tell us, but they eventually returned to Jerusalem, and it is here that Jesus tells them to stay put. Now, all of us have had a year of staying put. Stay home or stay local has been plastered across our streets and our screens, so maybe it's not too difficult to imagine how the disciples were feeling and what they were thinking when Jesus tells them, "Stay here, don't go out, wait." But notice where Jesus tells them to stay. He says, "Stay in the city." Now, if you haven't had the chance to do so, I would highly recommend taking the time to listen to the thought of the day from 2 weeks ago, where Serenus wonderfully tells us about Jesus' ascension and reflects on Bethany as a place of rest, a place of intimacy. But after Bethany, the disciples had to return to the city. Now, quite often in the Bible, cities are described as places of danger, places of darkness. The very first city, we are told, was built by Cain after he murdered his brother Abel. Shortly after that, we read of people gathering in the plains of Babel, wanting to build a city, build a tower that reaches to the heavens, until God had to stop them. And this isn't something which we see only in the Old Testament. In Luke's Gospel, Jesus' ministry begins with him almost getting killed in Nazareth, and it ends with his eventual execution in Jerusalem. That very same threat, of course, still looms over his disciples, former associates of this executed Messiah, identifiable by their Galilean accent. For them, staying in the city meant staying in that place of danger, a place of uncertainty. And now I've got to be honest, I'm personally not a big fan of cities, so I think if I were one of the disciples, I would be asking Jesus, "Stay in the city? You sure? Why? Why stay here in this place of danger? This very city that killed you? You've already told us that we need to proclaim the gospel to the nations. Why not, we just skip Jerusalem, we move on to Judea, to Samaria, and to the ends of the earth? Or why not just go back to Galilee, where we had a real following over there? Jesus, this city, Jerusalem, it's just got nothing for us." That's how I would have felt. But no. Jesus says, "Stay in the city until you have been clothed with power from on high." You see, the redemption of the whole world will begin in Jerusalem. The city that killed the prophets and murdered the Messiah will be the birthplace of God's church. Stay in this city. It is here that God's power will come upon you. And true enough, 10 days after their dear friend and teacher ascended into heaven, the disciples were praying, devoting themselves to worship in the city when the Holy Spirit comes upon them on the day of Pentecost. And human history is forever changed. You see, God's in a work of redeeming seemingly lost places, and the church, through the Spirit, is his vehicle for that work. Now, God doesn't always want us to stay put. Maybe there's something about a relationship we're in or our job which doesn't quite live up to God's call, and where it might be appropriate to move out of that situation. But for some of us, and maybe many of us, perhaps God is inviting us to be instruments of blessing in places of darkness. Maybe it's your workplace, your school, or the streets of Oxford. Or maybe God is inviting you to encounter him in a new way, even in the busyness and the mundaneness of the city. Speaking for myself, I know I so often expect to meet with God in the countryside when I'm out in nature, away from the hustle and the bustle of urban life. But maybe it's right here, in the supermarkets, in the student houses, that God's going to pour out his power upon each and every one of us as his church. Earlier I mentioned that cities are often depicted as places of darkness and danger. We think of Sodom, Babylon, Rome. But the Bible story doesn't end there. In Revelation, we read of a heavenly city prepared for those whose names are written in the book of life. The city of God, where God dwells with his people, wiping every tear from their eyes. The New Jerusalem, which offers healing to the nations. In the divine economy, the places of darkness and danger are restored, yet transformed into places of God's light and God's love. So church, may we expect to receive God's transformative power here in our city. May we be channels of his blessing, channels of his light in places of darkness and the places of danger where he has placed us.